All right, guys, let's continue with Free to Choose. Cradle to Grave, Chapter 4. Cradle to Grave, Chapter 4 of Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. This one is called What is Politically Feasible? So he's asking the question, what is politically feasible? This is Cradle to Grave, Free to Choose. What is politically feasible? This is the last part of this chapter. This is a fine dream, but unfortunately has no chance whatsoever of being enacted at present. 3 presidents, President Nixon, Ford, and Carter, have considered or recommended a program including elements of a negative income tax. In each case, political pressures have led them to offer the program as an addition to many existing programs rather than as a substitute for them. In each case, the subsidy rate was so high that the program gave little, if any, incentive to recipients to earn income. These misshapen programs would have made the whole system worse, not better. Despite our having been the first to have proposed a negative income tax as a replacement for our present welfare system, one of us testified before Congress against the version that President Nixon offered as the Family Assistance Plan. The political obstacles to an acceptable negative income tax are of 2 related kinds. The political obstacles to an acceptable negative income tax are of 2 related kinds. The more obvious is the existence of vested interests in present programs. The recipients of benefits, state and local officials who regard themselves as benefiting from the programs, and above all, the welfare bureaucracy that administers them. The less obvious obstacle is the conflict among the objectives that advocates of welfare reform, including existing vested interests, seek to achieve. The less obvious obstacle is the conflict among the objectives that advocates of welfare reform. So the less obvious obstacle is the conflict among the objectives that advocates of welfare reform, including existing vested interests, seek to achieve. There's a conflict among the objectives that advocates of welfare seek to. As Martin Anderson puts it in an excellent chapter on the impossibility of radical welfare reform. As Martin Anderson puts it in an excellent chapter on the impossibility of radical welfare reform. This guy's just like, he doesn't think it could even work. So all radical welfare reform schemes have 3 basic parts that are politically sensitive to a high degree. The first is the basic benefit level provided, for example, to a family of 4 on welfare. The second is the degree to which the program affects the incentive of a person on welfare to find work or to earn more. The third is the additional cost to the taxpayers. All radical welfare reform schemes have 3 basic parts that are politically sensitive to a high degree. The basic benefit level provided, the degree to which the program affects the incentive of a person on welfare to even go to work. The third is the additional cost of taxpayers. To become a political reality, the plan must provide a decent level of support for those on welfare. It must contain strong incentives to work, and it must have a reasonable cost. It must contain strong incentives to work, like for people to actually go to work, and it must have a reasonable cost. And it must do all 3 at the same time. The conflict arises from the content given to decent, to strong, and to reasonable, but especially to decent. If a decent level of support means that few, if any, current recipients are to receive less from the reform program than they now do from the collection of programs available, then it is impossible to achieve all 3 objectives simultaneously, no matter how strong and reasonable are interpreted. Yet, as Anderson says, there is no way that the Congress, at least in the near future, is going to pass any kind of welfare reform that actually reduces payments for millions of welfare recipients. Consider the simple negative income tax that we introduced as an illustration in the preceding section. A break-even point for a family of 4 of $7,200, a subsidy rate of 50%, which means a payment of $3,600 to a family with no other source of support. A subsidy rate of 50% would give a tolerably strong incentive to work. The cost would be far less than the cost of the present complex of programs. However, the support level is politically unacceptable today. As Anderson says, the typical welfare family of four in the United States, which is now back in 1978, qualifies for about $6,000 in services and money every year. In higher paying states like New York, a number of welfare families receive annual benefits ranging from $7,000 to $12,000 and more. Even the 6,000 typical figure requires a subsidy rate of 83.3% if the break-even point is kept at 7,200. Such a rate would both seriously undermine the incentive to work and add enormously to cost. The subsidy rate could be reduced by making the break-even point higher, but that would add greatly to the cost. This is a vicious cycle from which there is no escape, so long as it is not politically feasible to reduce the payments to many persons who now receive high benefits from multiple current programs. Anderson is right. There is no way to achieve all the politically necessary conditions for radical welfare reform at the same time. However, what is not politically feasible today may become politically feasible tomorrow. Political scientists and economists have had a miserable record in forecasting what will be politically feasible. Their forecasts have repeatedly been contradicted by experience. Our great and revered teacher Frank H. Knight was fond of illustrating different forms of leadership with ducks that fly in a V with a leader in front. Every now and then he would say the ducks behind the leader would veer off in a different direction while the leader continued flying ahead. When the leader looked around and saw that no one was following, he would rush to get in front of the V again. That is one form of leadership, undoubtedly the most prevalent form in Washington. Ooh, I like this little analogy. While we accept the view that our proposals are not concurrently While we accept the view that our proposals are not currently feasible politically, we have outlined them as fully as we have, not only as an ideal that can guide incremental reform, but also in the hope that they may sooner or later become politically feasible. Anyway, I'll just read the conclusion as well. The empire ruled over until recently by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. So the empire ruled over until recently by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare has been spending more and more of our money each year on our health. The main effect has simply been to raise the cost of medical and health services without any corresponding improvement in the quality of medical care. Ooh. The main effect has simply been to raise the cost of medical and health services without any corresponding improvement in the quality of medical care. This is when that guy fucking Luigi, he's a valedictorian at a fucking school in Connecticut that's like this all boys school, one of probably the best high schools in the fucking nation. He's valedictorian and he goes and shoots some fucking medical care executive. It's insane. That's very telling. Spending on education has been skyrocketing. Anyway, the empire ruled over until recently by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare spends more and more of our money on each year on our health. Again, inflates. Spending on education has been skyrocketing, yet by common consent, the quality of education has been declining. This is in 1978. Increasing sums and increasingly rigid controls have been imposed on us to promote racial integration, yet our society seems to be becoming more fragmented. Billions of dollars are being spent each year on welfare, yet at a time when the average standard of life of the American citizen is higher than it has ever been in history, the welfare rolls are growing. Billions of dollars are being spent each year on welfare, yet at a time when the average standard of life of the American citizen is higher than it has ever been in history, the welfare rolls are growing. The Social Security budget is colossal, yet Social Security is in deep financial trouble. The young complain, and with much justice, about the high taxes they must pay, taxes that are needed to finance the benefits going to the old. Yet the old complain, and with justice, that they cannot maintain the standard of living that they were led to expect. A program that was enacted to make sure that our older folks never become objects of charity has seen the number of old persons on welfare rolls grow. By its own accounting, in 1 year, by its own accounting, in 1 year, HEW, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. That's what that means, HEW. By its own accounting, in 1 year, HEW lost through fraud, abuse, and waste, an amount of money that would have sufficed to build well over 1,000 houses costing more than 50,000 each. The waste is distressing, but it is the least of the evils of the paternalistic programs that have grown to such massive size. Their major evil is their effect on the fabric of our society. They weaken the family, reduce the incentive to work, save, and innovate, reduce the accumulation of capital, and limit our freedom. These are the fundamental standards by which they should be judged. I want to make a video. I need to study the, what is that called? Negative income tax? And negative income tax. All right, guys, that was what is politically feasible and the conclusion of chapter 4, Cradle to the Grave of Freedom to Choose. Next is chapter 5.